Welcome to the UK visa training session. I hope you've all been enjoying some of the fantastic speeches and workshops that have been delivered so far today. For those of you who I haven't had the opportunity to meet online or offline today or over the past 15 years during my time in the sector, my name's Chris and I'm the Global Director of Student Recruitment for the Schools and Colleges Division within Oxford International. And I'm one of the architects behind the conference today. And when we were developing the conference format, we were committed to providing you with insights into industry trends through keynote speeches and panel discussions, also insights into the excellence of our academic provisions, which we've done through the workshops that are being delivered by Mark, by Yasmin, by Rory and Andrew. But we also recognise the need to support you as our partners in other areas, and hence the session from Nick on the Access platform and digital marketing, and this session which covers the crucial area, well, a very crucial area for us all, which is visas and compliance. So immigration rules in the UK are constantly changing, so we work very closely with Newland Chase Education to help navigate the regulations and ensure that our schools and our students are compliant. And this is actually the second session that we've delivered in partnership with Newland Chase. The feedback from the first session was very positive, and actually based on previous experience, I suspect there'll be a lot of questions that come through, and we've received quite a few in advance already. So it's time for me to zip it, and without further ado, I'm very pleased to introduce you to Steve and Sean from Newland Chase Education, who will be leading the session for you guys today.
Cheers. Thanks very much, Chris, and welcome everybody. If you haven't been with us before, I'm Steve Paxton. I'm the director of the business, and Sean Thornton is with me today, and he's looks after all the operations of the business, and he is looks after the client relations. So we're going to go through an update of the new points-based system that was introduced. It started in October last year, and it's slowly been updated. In fact, yesterday there were some more releases come out. So as Chris said, it does change and fluctuate quite frequently. But we'll give you a basic outline of what the new sort of structure is, and then we've got some questions that came in yesterday, and we'll answer those at the end. And then obviously we're happy to take any more questions that you have. So yeah, without further ado, we'll carry on. Just to give you a brief outline of Newland Chase Education, we've got offices in 25 countries around the world, as you can see there. And we've got two divisions. We've expanded into not just doing UK inbound student, university, and internships into the UK, but we've now got worldwide student availability. So if you have any students going to other countries besides the UK, we can help facilitate that also. Our staff too, we recognize that a lot of the documentation, because it's legal documentation, and to be able to communicate the legal side of it, it's always better if it's in a person's home language. And so we have got staff that can speak Cantonese, Mandarin, and a lot of other languages. So that also helps us just get the correct message across to all your parents and students. So just to summarize, as a brief outline of the new, as we put the new-ish points-based system, because it started in October last year, and it's sort of moving along from there. It's not called Tier 4 anymore, it's called the student visa route. And just some of the updates on it is parents of a child student applicant can meet the financial requirements by relying on funds held by their partner. That was released yesterday. That came out that we saw. The UK post-study work visa category is starting this summer in July, and we'll go through that more later on. The EU student visa route, so for all the agents in the EU, that's something new, and it's digitalized now. So we'll go through that. And obviously they've extended the time prior to start of course to 6 months, where you can now start applying for your visas. So we have started this last week because September starters, it's open in March now. So yeah, and I've just had one of my staff members this morning saying to me they did an EU visa, and within 24 hours they got a result back from the UK VI. So that was super quick. So at this time of year, that's the sort of timeframes that we're getting at the moment. And then obviously BNO visas for agents and obviously parents and students from the Hong Kong area. That opened up, you could come with leave outside the rules to start with. From September last year, you were given a temporary 6-month visa to come into the UK, and then it opened up at the beginning of February, but they wanted to ask everybody, please hold off and do it digitally from the 23rd of February onwards. They're setting up the same sort of platform that the EU students would be going on, and that helps where you if you've got a chip passport, you wouldn't have to go to a visa center for your biometrics. You could do everything digitally online. So depending on the structure. So that's just a couple of the points, the crucial points that came out from that. So on the BNO visa route, the eligibility, they're trying to make sure that this visa route is not used instead of the parent of a child tier 4 visa, the old tier 4. So they don't want parents to be using this route, because the BNO route is for the family to come across to the UK and eventually have settled status. So that's just a key element, that families mustn't try and use this instead of the old parent of a tier 4 visa. And you just need to have been a BNO holder beforehand. You don't have to have a live or valid BNO passport at the moment. And if you don't know if you're BNO qualified, you can ask the Home Office or put the application in, and they will do the check. And it might take a little bit longer, but they will come back to the parents with that. So you can stay. How long can you stay on these? You can either apply for 2 types, as 2 years, 6 months, or you can apply for 5 years. And what you can and cannot do on this type of visa is work. You can work and you can study, but you cannot apply for most benefits that's in the public funds. How much does it cost? So you're going to have to pay for the visa application fee, and you're going to have to pay for the health surcharge, and prove that you've got enough money to support yourself and family members for at least 6 months while you're in the UK. So the visa fee is, if you're staying for 2 years and 6 months, if you're applying for that initial one, it's £180, and £250 if you're applying for 5 years. And then you might, as I said before, you might need to go for a biometric for your fingerprints and photo. And if you do have to go for that, that's a £19.20 fee that they charge for there. In the healthcare surcharge, for each adult 18 or older, it costs, if you're going for the 2 years, 6 months, it's about £1,560. And if you're going for the full 5 years, it's £3,120. And then for each child under 18, the healthcare surcharge is £1,175 if you're the 2.5 years sort of visa, or 5 years is £2,350. So, and that'll all be paid as part of your online application from that perspective. So, as I say, the main BNO holder needs to apply for it, and within 24 hours, they would like the rest of the family to have their applications in too. If you don't get it in within time, then you won't be able to apply with the BNO passport holder. So just from that perspective, they wanting, as I said, on the 23rd of February to do it digitally. And when they, that is very similar, you take a selfie with your phone to do all your biometric sort of documentation, and then submit it online. And go through that process instead of visiting an actual visa center. Some of the things that you'll need to prove is a proof of your permanent home address, and proof you have enough money to support yourself and your family for around 6 months. And dependents that are applying with the B&O, they would just need to prove that the relationship that you've got with that B&O holder. So a copy of a marriage certificate, birth certificate, those sort of things. Also a TB test certificate. If you've been living in Hong Kong or another country for the past 6 months, you'll need to do that. And then the sort of timeframes they're saying, it takes most probably up to, they say up to 12 weeks to do it, to get the reply back from them, up to 12 weeks. Obviously, the sooner you do it, the better, if it's not in the main visa sort of time frame, which is May, June, July, where they get really busy for September school applications. And then if your application is successful, you've got to travel to the UK within 90 days if you went to a visa application centre, or before your visa expires if you use the immigration ID check smartphone sort of app. So roughly that is the B&O. You can only, as I say, utilize this if you're wanting to. Don't try and use this if it's replacing the parent of a tier 4. Right, so that's B&O. There might be some questions on that, and you can ask us at the end more in depth into the B&O visa route. Quarantine and entry into the UK. So pre-departure requirements, you're going to have to go through this, which I think is quite well publicized. Do a COVID test, fill out a passenger locator form, and you're going to have to go, if you're from a red list country too, you're going to have to go into quarantine, and there are travel restrictions and you have to go into a hotel. But if there are a student that is under 18 years old, the Home Office has come out on the 4th of March that so under 18 and you've got residency rights, so BRP, so students with that sort of identification can come in and they can quarantine in their school's boarding establishment. They don't have to go into a government allocated hotel. So that's one of the key things that was certain sectors applied for that, because obviously they're worried about safeguarding for an under 18-year-old staying in a hotel by themselves for 10 days. So yep, that's a really good answer that we've managed to get out of the Home Office. On the graduate route, we can see that has been launched on the 1st of, it will be launched 1st of July this year. And it is now called Appendix Graduate. And again, as you can see on the screen, the eligibility is a successful completion of a degree in the UK. Institutions, you've attended an institution with a track record of compliance. And like Sean put in the question about what about remote students, and they've got to return by the 21st of June 2021 to be able to qualify for this. Then the entitlements that's the graduate route has got is that you can remain in the UK for 2 years to work or seek employment. If you do a PhD and other doctoral graduates, they get 3 years permission to stay on the graduate visa. All the other graduates get the 2 years. And what's really nice about it is that there's no minimum salary and flexibility for an employer, unlike the new skilled worker route, where there's minimum salaries and those sort of things. So that is the visa route from there. From my side, I'm now going to hand across to Sean, and Sean will go into the nitty-gritty of the rest of the visas, and then we'll both be available towards the end for any questions. So yeah, thanks, Sean.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. The first thing I'm just going to talk about is the changes to the visitor provisions. So students can now study for 6 months under the visitor route. Previously, they had to make applications as short-term students. That route has now been abolished, except for English language courses where they're 11 months long. The students can now enter and study for 6 months as visitors. Now, that's the question really when considering whether or not a student needs sponsorship. So if a course is longer than 6 months, they need sponsorship under the points-based system, and they need to be assigned a CAS. If the course is less than 6 months, they can do it as a visitor. They don't need the whole sponsorship. There's a big distinction between visa nationals and non-visa nationals. So common non-visa national countries, the United States, Hong Kong, these people don't need formal entry clearance before traveling to the UK. They're actually granted their status on arrival at the border. If you're from a visa national country, such as Nigeria or Russia, you have to obtain a visitor visa in advance of travel. It's a big thing to be aware of when you're kind of planning. Non-visa nationals status at the border, visa nationals in advance. And it's just the standard visitor application that they need to make for study. An important point with the visitor route is it's not to be abused. So students can't simply kind of come in over and over again and keep getting stamped 6 months entry. Eventually, you'll reach a situation where they're actually denied at the border, and that's something obviously nobody wants. So it's not something to use over and over again. There are rules against frequent entries. Permitted activities, studying on a course with an accredited institution for up to 6 months. One thing to be aware of is that visitors aren't entitled to free NHS care in the way that British residents are, and that's something that's important to bear in mind. Students who are coming in on the visitor route might want health insurance or their European health card. So the visa application process, just to basically summarize the timescales. So applications for entry clearance can be made within 6 months of the course start date. Applications for leave to remain, so those students who are already here and are renewing their visas, can be made within 3 months. So it's 6 months outside the UK, 3 months inside the UK. The processing times are 3 weeks outside the UK or 5 working days if you purchase the UKVI priority service. Within the UK, it's much slower. It's actually an 8 to 12 week decision making unless you purchase priority service, which is expensive in the UK. It's a very expensive process. So an online application form is filled in, and it's gathering kind of general information about personal details, parents, information, travel history, things like that. And certain copies of certain documents have to be uploaded to the website. A good change in the system a couple of years ago was they actually allowed you to upload your documents, which is perfect. So it means, there's no risk of kind of missing anything at the visa center. Everything can be uploaded. Another good change recently is that they have now released an app for biometric enrolment. So good thing for EU students, certain EU students will be eligible to use this app, and they won't actually need to go to a visa application center. Any that have biometric passports can do the ID checking app. Within the UK, people who've had their biometrics registered in the last few years can also benefit from not having to go to an appointment. They simply recycle them, and you can do it on the app, which is brilliant. So I've got my thing right. Another interesting kind of change recently is the status documents. So previously all visa holders were given vignettes to enter the UK, and then they collected a BRP card on arrival here. There's been a digitization of the Home Office process, and they're actually moving away from physical immigration documents, and people are able to view their status online. And so that's a very kind of positive change. There's been no more losing of BRP cards and things like that. There's actually a portal to check status online. And move on to the next one. So just to kind of go through some of the key requirements of student visa applications, the biggest one is parental consent. So any student under the age of 18 needs parental consent with their application. If they're over 18, they need parental consent if they're relying on funds from a parent. So it's pretty much across the board, everyone's going to need parental consent for their applications. Who can provide it? So only biological parents or those with legal custody are able to actually provide parental consent, and that's very important. Step parents who haven't been granted custody of a child can't sign a consent letter. It's a very common reason for refusal and something you need to be quite careful of. So what are the requirements? So what it needs to be in a parental consent letter. Essentially, it's got to give consent to travel and accommodation in the UK. The reception arrangements in place, that has to be consented to, and use of funds. Those are the key main points. Boarding students, obviously the letter has to consent to them studying and living as a boarding student. Day students, the letters need to be very, very particular. They have to really spell out the living arrangement that the student's going to be in, so they can live independently. If they're over 16, the consent letter needs to state that. If they're living with an uncle or an aunt, it needs to be very clear, that's who they're living with, this is the relationship, here's the address they're living in. Private foster care applications require even more kind of onerous letters of consent, and you also need to submit one from the carer, not just the parent. Quite important there. So with another big area of obviously immigration is financial evidence. Who needs it? So students whose nationality doesn't feature in the differentiation arrangements in the low risk list, which is anyone who's in the EU is actually in the low risk list, along with Americans, Hong Kong, Canadians, and China, but I'll come on to that in a moment. So who can provide, actually, so just to touch on what you actually need to show. So any outstanding school fees for the first academic year, so if you've paid half a year's fees, you need to show the other half in bank statements. And if you're a day student, you also may have to show maintenance with your application, which is 9 months. It's about £9,135, I think, but slightly more if you're living in London. So who can provide financial evidence for a sponsored student application? It's just the biological parents or the student themselves. There are a few very narrow exceptions for things like sponsorship by an international company or by another group like that. But by and large, it's only the biological parents or the student themselves who can provide financial evidence. Any funds need to be held for 28 consecutive days before the application is submitted, and by and large, only personal bank accounts are acceptable, savings accounts, current accounts, things like that. You can't use business accounts as proof of funds for a student application. The low risk arrangements are something to always be quite careful of, because yes, it does exempt you from having to prove that you can support yourself in the UK, and it does exempt you from having to provide financial evidence. But the Home Office have always reserved the right to request it. They've always kept that card kind of in the back of their hand and said, right, should we want to see your evidence, we can request it after your application has gone in. The problem with that is that the funds have to have been compliant as of the date of application. So if you've put in an application for kind of a low risk student and not included any financial evidence, if they request it, it has to have been held for 28 days before they actually paid their visa fee. So they can't run to the bank and suddenly put money in. Really, even if financial evidence isn't going to be submitted, it's often wise just to make sure the money is actually available in an account somewhere so that it could be produced should they request it. As I said, all EU nationalities so far that we know of are on the differentiation list, so they're all going to be treated as low risk, but we may see that may change over time. We don't know at the moment. Another interesting change about the new system, students renewing in the UK who've studied here for 12 months or have kind of been here for 12 months with formal permission will not actually need to provide financial evidence with their applications either. And that's all students, not just the low risk nationals. Okay. So English language is kind of the other big area of visa applications, and who needs to demonstrate it? It's probably better to ask who doesn't need to demonstrate it really, and that's child students don't need to submit evidence of their ability to speak English with applications. Educational sponsors have an obligation to assess it and determine the level of English, but child students don't need to sit, self-test or prove it in any other way. Nationals of majority English-speaking countries also don't need financial evidence. America, Canada, Australia, places like that. There is a list online of who the Home Office deems English-speaking countries. They don't need it at all. And anyone who has studied English language or literature as a GCSE or A-level doesn't need to prove that they can speak English, but they do need to submit their GCSE results or their A-level results to prove it. And there are some other exceptions as well. People who have done degrees overseas can be exempt from it depending on how it's taught, and there are a few other ways. If you do need to prove you can speak English, and if you do have to prove this to Home Office, there are secure English language tests that can be used. There's different boundaries based on the visa requirement, based on the visa application and the course of study, but on the screen there you can see those are the secure English language tests that are accepted by the Home Office, and it's really important that you pick the right ones and that you don't do one that isn't on the approved kind of list. A big problem we get all the time is students sit the general IELTS test and they don't sit the IELTS academic, and that's often been a problem problem for us because it doesn't have the UKVI reference numbers and stuff that we need. So just those links are quite good. One thing to also bear in mind is that, the college, Oxford itself, may have its own requirements for entry. It may not be that they're asking for evidence of English language just because it's needed for the visa application. It's just part of their general scrutiny to see if students can do the course. So even if someone doesn't need to prove it for the visa, don't be surprised if the college or something is asking for a self-test. That may just simply happen. And those are kind of the big areas of a visa application: parental consent, finance, English language. Those are kind of how you meet the requirements by meeting those. Aside from that, there's a couple other things. So TB testing, anyone who's lived in a TB risk country for more than 6 months prior to the application needs a TB test. And again, it has to be a UKVI approved test from a UKVI approved centre. It's got a hologram on it and a picture, and they're always in the same format. Just important not to miss that. Residence permits are required where you're making an application outside essentially your country of nationality. So if you've got a common example, you've got an American applying from Nigeria, they need a Nigerian residence permit unless they have a Nigerian passport of some time. The same is true of Hong Kong, China. If you're applying in China and you're a Hong Kong national, you should be submitting kind of a mainland residence permit with your application. Police registration, renewing students who in their previous visa were required to register with the police, they must submit the certificate. So that's very important to remember. If as part of a previous visa, you have police registration as a condition, you must prove that you kind of met the conditions of the visa. Often what happens is people forget to go register, and we actually end up sending them down to do the registration 2 years later than they should have done, but just before they're actually making the application to renew their visa. It's not something to panic over. The police aren't too bothered really about when students actually do this. It's never been something that they've really felt was needed. But yeah, it's just a point you may have to submit the certificate. Genuine student interviews are something that are conducted at the discretion of the Home Office, and they're usually reserved for over 16s from slightly higher risk countries. But they can, at any point they want, they can choose to interview a student. Mostly it is older students that get this, but if they have particular concerns about something, they can also interview a child's parents, and we've seen that happen quite a lot. What they're looking at is essentially whether you are a genuine student, but the Home Office isn't who you want really to be making that kind of judgment, because they're not educators. So it's a very, very high risk situation when you've got a Home Office caseworker interviewing a student to determine if they're genuine. They refuse applications for all kinds of reasons following these interviews. The person didn't have a good enough understanding of the local area, or they didn't know what travel arrangements were in place, or they didn't know enough about the course, or they really can be quite cutthroat. If any students are invited to interview, the best thing we think is for them to sit down with an academic tutor or a member of school staff or somebody similar and actually go through what kind of questions they should expect, and really get up to date on as much about the institution and the course of study as possible. That's important. And another thing that often comes up in visas is just the qualifications used to obtain an offer of a place. Very important for university students who are not from low-risk countries. If their CAS statement lists any kind of qualification on there, that has to be submitted with the application. So if it references the A-level results or something similar, that's got to go in. It's only ever what's actually listed on the CAS statement, and there's an evidence used to obtain offer section. So just check in there. If there's anything listed, make sure that gets submitted. Okay, we've got some questions in advance here, so I'm just moving myself.
So we'll go through these questions, and then I see there's about another 8, about another 14 more. In fact, we'll cover all those. And I saw someone raise their hand just now, so we'll get to you as soon as we can, but we'll just go through all these questions one by one.
So question number 1's on timescales. So students are able to apply 6 months before they travel. When would you recommend schools begin the process? Now, really. There's no real harm in beginning the application process now. The only thing to bear in mind is the entry vignette. So the UKVI will start the 30-day entry vignette either 1 month before the course start date or 1 week before the date of travel on the application form. If students are applying well in advance of actually coming, just make sure they know what their travel date is going to be. Otherwise, they're going to have a bit of inconvenience getting new vignettes issued, and it's going to cost money, and it's a bit of a pain. So early applications, just make sure they know exactly when they want to travel. The second question, can students progress from the first year of A-level to a university foundation program at the same school or another institution? And then the difference between whether they're on a child or a general. Tier 4 general, the old Tier 4 general students have to show academic progression across CAS statements, essentially. When they apply for a new visa, it needs to be at a higher academic level than the previous one. There's also that is negated by applying overseas. So if you apply from outside the UK, you don't necessarily need to progress academically across CAS statements. The reason I mention that is it's a question of what level the foundation program is at. If that's taught at RQF level 3 rather than RQF level 4, it's not academic progression. So that's something to bear in mind. The other thing to bear in mind is the timescales where students are allowed to study below degree level. So you can only study for 2 years as a student with a capital S, as in the student route, below degree level over the age of 18. So that's another thing to really bear in mind if you've got students kind of jumping between programs like that. They are time restricted once they turn 18. The other consideration is who actually can offer university foundation programs and what level that can be. Tier 4 child students can't study foundation programs. They need to be sponsored as Tier 4 general. If they're at RQF level 4, if they're at RQF level 3, there's a bit more room there. But by and large, they could, yes, if a student's done the first year of A-level and they've got time and it's academic progression and all these kind of things, yes, they can move on to the foundation program. There's just a lot of things to be aware of. So what's the latest on the graduate visa route? It's just been announced. It's open in July. It's part of the Home Office kind of moving away from their more hostile system. They actually want to promote kind of immigration, not just for particular skilled jobs that people have already been sponsored for. They want university students to be able to remain here and look for work for a few years. And so it is an attractive offer. There's no real requirement except having studied here and finished a degree here and everything. You don't have to be sponsored. You don't have to have a job lined up, and you don't have to have a particular salary, as Steve said earlier. So watch this space, it's quite interesting. What are the visa processing times currently? And do you anticipate any delays in certain regions? As I said, it's 3 weeks or 5 working days. Some visa centers offer super priority service, like the big ones in China, and that cuts it down to 24 hours. They always kind of reserve the right to take longer. So in the summer, as many of you will know, 3 weeks can become 4 simply because they are so busy. Within the UK, it is a much slower process. It's 8 weeks, or it's kind of a minimum really, unless you buy the priority packages, which are quite expensive here. And I mean, do we anticipate any delays in certain regions? Again, it's difficult to anticipate. I don't know if the visa centers within the European Union are set up for the kind of traffic that they are in China and places like that, but they do also have a lot of students doing applications on a phone app now. So it may be that the amount of students not having to go to the visa center does actually help with the process, but every year there are delays, and every year we just kind of have to deal with them really. Question 5, there have been a lot of developments in the English language testing sphere. What are the CELTs currently recognized for UKVI for the student visa routes relevant to boarding schools? As it's the links on the previous page, it's the British Council kind of IELTS test, the Pearson, and there's a few others. But yeah, just always make sure you've got the exact test that they actually require. But yeah, those links take you to the exact pages, so you can follow those. Will there still be a 24 months visa length cap regulation on level 3 students studying on Tier 4 general visas? Yes, so there is a 2-year limit to study below degree level after the age of 18 as a student, and this is a huge change that I even think most universities haven't quite got their heads around this yet. We've seen quite a lot of advice that we don't agree with coming out of some of the big unis. Previously, it was any study as a sponsored student over the age of 18 counted towards the time limit. When they changed the rules and they changed the policy books, they changed the wording of that. So it's now only time spent as a student, not a child student. So if you've got a child student who's now 19 and they've been on a child visa for a few years, they shouldn't actually have had any time taken off that 24-month limit yet. But again, a lot of universities are still catching up with this. Can students coming on a student visa now apply for a Tier 4 general visa whilst in the UK? By default, no. It's not permitted to switch from being a visitor to a student, but because of coronavirus, they're being slightly more pragmatic about this. We've put in some applications where people have switched. The rules are starting to change again, so really, they're kind of now expecting people to apply from overseas now that lockdowns are beginning to lift. But one thing to remember, I would ask the Home Office this question. If you're a student wanting to switch from being a visitor to a sponsored student in the UK, I'd actually try to get the blessing of the coronavirus team at Home Office. Actually email them and request that you be allowed to do this, rather than putting in the application and just kind of taking a chance on it. I think it's better if you can touch base with them in advance. Okay, will EU or EEA students be required to secure visas to join short stay summer courses in 2021? So EU students are non-visa nationals, much like American and Hong Kong. They are granted visitor status at the border for 6 months. Those kind of students can come in and do summer courses. As long as it's less than 6 months, they don't need to actually apply for a visa in advance. One thing that's good is to take confirmation of being accepted on a course with you, some kind of enrollment letter or offer letter from the school, just to make sure the border officer knows why the students are coming in. But by and large, that's fine. Can level 2 and level 3 be one joint CAS? No, each CAS has to be at one qualification level, and Home Office inspectors absolutely loathe schools that put it on both, and they do look out for it. It's something that is really against the rules. Separate visas are required for GCSE A levels, and then moving up. A CAS can be issued for 6 years, so a sponsored student can actually come on one 6-year visa, but it has to end at year 11. They simply can't spread it more. And then degrees, master's degrees, postgraduate degrees, they all need different CASs. So will the minimum bank statement amount be the same? 9 months living amount? Yes. So the maintenance calculations, it is worked out over 9 months, and that's what you have to display. EU nationals are low risk, so they shouldn't have to submit financial evidence with their applications. But again, of course, Home Office can always request it, and we don't know how they're going to treat all the EU countries, whether they'll be uniform in their approach yet. So could you confirm for the new student route regarding the financial requirement, do students need to deposit funds 28 days before submitting? Yes, yes, they do. Any funds used in a student visa application have to be held for 28 days before the online application is made, before the visa fee is paid. What they'll do is they'll actually count backwards 28 days, either from the date of application or the date of the issuance of the document, and they'll select the lowest balance they can see in that 28-day period. Something to be very careful of. If there's a lot of movements in an account, the balance dipping below the requirement for even a few hours can actually ruin an application and lead it to fail.
Sean, sorry, I'll just go to the questions now, and then you can answer them. I'll just read them out so that everyone. So this one was right at the beginning at 12:30 from Tatiana Tucker. Are embassies offering visas? As you know, you can only apply 3 months in advance. Are embassies offering visa services in different countries? I have a lot of students with different questions, and thank you very much.
Okay, so for entry, it's actually 6 months in advance for students now. It's a big rule change there. The visa application appointments don't tend to actually be at embassies anymore. I believe some of them are, but Home Office has outsourced its application process to commercial partners. One of them is called TLS and the other one is called VFS, and they're based in various regions. In Europe, I believe the predominant one is TLS for moving to the UK, whereas in America, China, it's all VFS Global. But yeah, there's visa application centers for every country in every country, so it should be easy to find.
Perfect. So can international students currently in the UK change their visas without needing to go back to their home country?
It depends on their eligibility to switch. So if they're here as sponsored students or dependents, if they're here as a dependent of a parental visa, or they're here on some other kind of long-term visa, then yes, they should be able to switch into the student category without going home. They may need to go home for academic progression reasons that I talked about earlier, or if they're here as visitors, the default position is they need to apply for entry as a student.
For South Asia, so India, Pakistan, will UKVR require child student visa applicants from the listed country for visa interview, considering these students are age 16 or 17 for A-level / IB studying?
We do find that Pakistan is one of the kind of most commonly refused nationalities, and there are more genuine student interviews for those regions. India, I don't believe, I've not seen too many Indians be required to do it. Pakistan, Bangladesh, And really the big one is Vietnam, of course, with all the kind of problems with child trafficking. Their students are often interviewed. Iran, we see a lot of Iranian students interviewed. But yeah, anyone over the age of 16 who's coming from one of those countries, they could well be interviewed by the Home Office, yeah.
The UK entrance visa, 90 days, so I think that's the vignette, has expired. The students have extended this twice. The latest one just expires. Can the student apply for an extension again, or does the student need to apply for a new visa?
I believe they can. I've never attempted it. I've never attempted the kind of third extension of a vignette. But yeah, there shouldn't actually be a problem with that. The same rules apply. They're just extending it. Yeah, there's no need for a new visa.
So this is from Lucy. Can international students transfer their student visa from one school to another whilst in the UK?
Yes, they can.
The student's child student visa expiry date July 2021. The student's next course start date is the 6th of September. And from the past regulation, the student will need to submit a visa application overseas as there's more than 28 days gap between the visa expiry and the new course date and start date. Is it still the same this year?
I believe it is, yes. I've not seen any change to that. It's something that does affect kind of university students more than those going to schools. But yeah, that rule is still in place.
Can IELTS indicator, the online test, be accepted as SELT proof, considering UK is not yet opened all their IELTS test centres?
Yeah, different providers release their certificates and results in different ways. One example, the Pearson's one, their results come out online very quickly, and you can just submit that with the application. The IELTS indicator isn't something I'm aware of specifically. Is it? I simply don't know what that is exactly. I assume it's a less formal IELTS test, but really it's the IELTS academic for UKVI that you need, not any other kind of IELTS test really. It's an online test. Okay, yeah. I know they are doing IELTS tests online, and I think that's perfectly acceptable. It's just you've got to be careful that you get the exact one that you need. It'll have a Home Office reference number in it that the school needs to quote on the CAS.
Can students go back to study visa route after the end of their post-study work visa, the graduate route, if applying for PG, postgraduate?
I believe so, yes. Yeah, they'd simply be applied. I mean, one thing that need to be checked is the eligibility to switch back into the student route. But yeah, I can't see a reason why not.
Does that mean Italian or Spanish Chinese students need to provide their EU resident status proof alongside with their China passport when submitting a visa application?
If they hold Chinese passports and they live in Italy or Spain, then they're applying there, then yes, they need to submit proof that they're actually legally in the country that they're applying from. It's just a general rule of thumb. If you're applying outside your country of nationality, you're living in a different country, you've got to submit evidence that you're legally allowed to be there. Otherwise, Home Office rejects the application.
Would a student studying for the integrated master degree qualify for post-study graduate route?
I don't see any reason why not. So the integrated, that's usually when a master's is kind of tagged onto the end of a bachelor's degree, like for a 4-year one. Yeah, I can't see any reason why not, unless I'm misunderstanding what they're integrated. Yeah.
No, I think you got that spot on. As there are many flights not available or even limited booking because of COVID pandemic, what if a 17-year-old student who wants to study 11 months general English course in UK, how can she prove the intention to leave in the visa application under this pandemic, as there may not be possible to reserve return flight in advance?
With any type of visa application, obviously the kind of sponsored student ones, it isn't a requirement to demonstrate that you intend to leave. But with other routes, means an intention to depart the UK is something to evidence. There's a couple of ways of doing it. One, by simply having enough money to book a flight whenever you choose. That's one way of evidencing it. Another one is ties to the country of origin, essentially. So if somebody has personal, academic, business commitments outside the UK, submitting evidence of that proves to the Home Office that they're not likely to try and say claim asylum here or something like that, simply because it's not in their interest to do so. Family overseas, they won't really consider elderly relatives or anything like that as much of a tie. But immediate family, parents and siblings and stuff like that, just explaining that the applicant maintains their private life outside the UK is how that's evidenced. There's not really a requirement to have a reserve return flight ticket booked. It's just it is a good thing to do if they can.
I have a student wanting to change school. She'll need to reapply for a new visa, and the government website has asked her to pay the IHS again. Would she be eligible for a refund for the IHS already paid?
No, the IHS is paid up front at the point of application. I believe you can ask the Home Office to refund things where there's a duplicate payment, but the answer is usually no. I think if somebody's made a lot of payments in a short space of time, like so they apply for a visa, and they immediately apply for a new one because they go to a different sponsor and they've not entered the UK, I think there is some scope there to ask the Home Office to refund it, but it's difficult. By and large though, it just has to be paid up front with every visa application, and it's calculated based on the time you're applying for, not how long you've been here. So yeah.
So students who decide to change program to Year 13 academic courses at Oxford Sixth Form College also need to show academic progression evidence. Question mark. Students' backgrounds only studying in the UK for Year 12 in September 2020. The student only will have AS Year 12 study report. There's no official examination board AS transcript.
It's not really the student that has to demonstrate academic progression. It's that the CAS that's issued must be at a higher qualification level than the previous one. So, and that doesn't apply if you're currently a child student. So if you're a child student and you're an A-level student, you can apply to do A-levels as a student, general, without having to worry about academic progression. Where it kicks in is if somebody's already on the student route and they get issued another CAS for a different course, it must be at a higher qualification level. The student doesn't need to prove that. It's whatever the level of the course is.
Can a student with a short-term visa switch to the student route visa inside of the UK due to the COVID at the moment?
Again, there is some scope for it in the concessions guidance, but they changed the language in it the other day, where it previously stated quite clearly that students would be able to do this in cases they'd normally need to apply from home. That language went, and it said now it says where eligible, you may be able to switch inside the UK. So it's a bit strange. Just ask the question of the coronavirus team. They do have a free email helpline. Give them the student situation and just say, right, we'd like to make this application in the UK due to COVID. We can't really be traveling. Is that okay? And they'll come back and say yes.
Is it likely for MBA graduates from their home country to gain a student visa for masters in the UK?
Every application is treated on its own merits. Yeah, I mean, if someone's done a master's overseas and wants to come here and do another one, there's no real problem with that. Yeah, every application is always treated on its own merits. Yeah.
3 months time applying visa inside the UK. How will it be calculated with current course end date, the visa end date, and the new course start date?
The 3 month thing relates to the new course start date on the new CAS. So basically, if somebody's going from GCSE to A-levels, they can apply within the UK 3 months before they start their A-level program.
Okay, then I think we're getting back to another one. If the student changes school and changes to a new sponsor, do they need to reapply for a new visa?
Yeah, whenever somebody changes educational provider, they have to make a new application. It's how the sponsorship system works. They can do so in the UK though, usually.
Perfect. So then I've just gone to the chat line, and it says, if the student is currently studying in the UK as a boarding student with a student visa and wants to change their visa status to BNO dependent visa, does he or she need to pay the IHS surcharge again?
Yes. Yeah, it's paid up front at the point of application. So yes, you can't get around that one.
Okay, perfect. And so yeah, I think Chris, I think that we've come to the end of the questions that have been posted out there. Yeah, from our side, I mean, we're still available, but it is 20 past, and I'm not too sure if we're good to go, Chris.
That's great, Stephen. A huge thank you to you and Sean, and a special thank you to Sean, who's actually on holiday today. So
no problem.
thanks very much for spending the time with us, John. That's a great dedication. And look, as always, we're tremendously grateful for your support and expertise. Surely the most dynamic duo within your field. And I think somebody asked whether we can paste those links through the chat. What we'll do is we'll make the presentation that Steve and Sean have kindly shared with us available as a PDF to all participants, so you guys will have those links to the CELT qualifications and more besides. But look, from our perspective as a schools and college division, it's great to see so many positive developments on student immigration here in the UK. You know, I think that does reflect a change in the government rhetoric. The UK government is now promoting UK education to international students. It's something that Barnaby Lennon touched upon in his keynote speech earlier today. And look, I think the UK schools have had enough of Canada and Australia eating our lunch. That's something I've said on a few occasions before. And look, I'm sure that we're going to see a rise in the UK share of the international student market in the coming months and years. You know, when there's that correlation between government policy and industry ambition, the resulting success is often very impressive. So a quick reminder for me that we have places remaining at the schools in September. So if you want to put some of this theory into practice, we'd love to welcome those student applications. Again, thank you all very much indeed for attending this session, for your time and for your contributions. Please stay tuned for the next session, which will be delivered by Andrew Gillespie, Vice Principal at Doverbrooks, and he's focusing on the skills that your students will need for the future. Please also do take the opportunity to book one-to-one meetings with our team of regional managers. They'll be delighted to discuss existing relationships, prospective relationships with the schools and Bucksmore, and that we're eager to keep the conversations flowing and we have appointments available throughout the day tomorrow. But from myself, from Sean, and from Steve, that's all, folks, and that we'll look forward to being in touch again very soon. All the best.
Thanks very much.
Thanks
Cheers.
again.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, Sean.